The sky above King's Landing was ablaze. Smoke curled up into the air like dragon fire, though no dragons had come yet. The city trembled with rebellion, death, and panic. The bells had rung, the mob had risen, and Sansa Stark stood in her chambers, clutching the edge of her bed, as the roar of chaos grew louder outside her window. She had always dreamed of escape, but never like this. Not in blood and fire. Not while wearing a torn gown, with scraped knees and fear pressing tight in her chest. The door creaked open. Sansa turned, heart leaping to her throat. It was him, the Hound, Sandor Clegane, a hulking, broken man with a face twisted by fire and a soul buried under cynicism. He wasn't a knight, and he made sure everyone knew it, but when he looked at her now, there was no mockery, no cruelty, just something raw and strange in his eyes. "They're tearing the city apart," he growled, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "You stay here, you die. Or worse." She swallowed hard. "Why do you care?" He tilted his head, studying her with something almost like pity, or maybe respect. "I don't, not really," he said, "but I'm leaving. And if you've got any bloody sense, you'll come with me." Silence hung heavy between them. The screams from the streets climbed higher. Sansa took a shaky breath. She thought of Joffrey, of his twisted grin and his petty cruelty. She thought of Cersei and her poison words, of the lies, the death, the pain of living in this castle that had become her prison. She stepped forward. Just one step, but it was enough. The Hound gave a small nod. "Smart girl." They moved fast, through the servant tunnels and down narrow passages, thick with the smell of piss, sweat, and stone. The Red Keep felt like a living beast, thrashing in agony. At one point they passed 2 gold cloaks dragging a screaming woman behind them. Sansa froze, terror locking her in place. But the Hound didn't stop. He reached them in 2 strides, and without a word, buried his sword into one man's neck. The second barely turned before he too fell, gurgling in a pool of red. Sansa stared wide-eyed. Blood on the walls, blood on his hands. "You can't afford to be soft now," he told her, wiping the blade on his cloak. "Not in this world." They crept through the lower city, ducking into shadows, as the mob raged like a wildfire. Drunk men looted shops. A set burned in the distance. Someone cried for mercy and got none. The Hound kept her close, shielding her with his massive frame. He didn't speak unless it was to curse. And yet, he never let go of her hand. By the time they reached the edge of the city, night had fallen. They stood at a broken gate. The road to nowhere stretched beyond. Sansa turned to look back one last time. King's Landing burned behind her. Everything she knew, her name, her life, her dreams, was being swallowed in flame. The Hound lit a torch and looked at her. "You coming, little bird?" She nodded slowly, tears running down her cheeks. Not from sorrow, but from the cold bite of freedom. "I'm not your little bird anymore," she whispered. He gave a half-smile, the kind that didn't reach his burned eye. "Good." And together they disappeared into the night. The road outside King's Landing was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that wraps around you after violence. Not peaceful, but watchful. The kind of silence that makes you wonder if something's hiding just out of sight, waiting to strike. Sansa stumbled over a root, nearly falling, but the Hound caught her wrist without missing a step. His grip was rough, but not cruel. She didn't thank him. She was too tired for words, and he wasn't the sort who cared for them anyway. They walked in silence, putting as much distance between themselves and the city as they could. Every now and then she looked back, expecting to see Lannister soldiers chasing after them, or worse, Joffrey, mounted on a white horse with that twisted smirk, promising her a slow death for daring to run. But no one came, just darkness and stars. By dawn they reached the edge of the river. The Hound led her to a ruined shack tucked between a small grove of trees. It smelled like rot and mildew, but it was shelter. That was enough. He built a fire, grumbling about her thin shoes and the idiots who made dresses without pockets. "You'll freeze before we reach any decent village," he muttered, tossing a log into the flames. "You've never worked a day in your life, have you?" "I've had to survive," she snapped, surprising them both. He looked at her for a long moment, then grunted. "Fair." She sat across from him, hugging her knees. "Where are we going?" "North, maybe. Away from this cursed war. Doesn't matter, long as we keep moving. But I want to go home, she said softer now. To Winterfell. He laughed, low and bitter. Winterfell's gone, girl. Burned. Taken by the bastard of Bolton, last I heard. Your home's a pile of ash, like everything else. The words hit her like a slap. She turned away, blinking fast, refusing to let him see the tears. He noticed anyway. Didn't mean it like that, he muttered. But you best stop dreaming. Dreams'll kill you faster than a blade. They stayed in the shack that day, resting, hiding. Sansa watched him as he cleaned his sword, as he dozed with one eye open, as he muttered in his sleep the name Gregor once, with enough hate to burn stone. That night, as the fire crackled low, she asked him, "Why did you save me?" He didn't answer right away. Finally he said, "Because you didn't deserve it. Any of it, and I was tired of watching them hurt you." She looked into his scarred face. He was ugly, yes, but not like Joffrey, not like Littlefinger. His ugliness was honest, worn on the outside. "Thank you," she whispered. He growled something under his breath and tossed another log into the fire, pretending not to hear him. The next morning they set out again. The road was rough, and so was the weather. A cold wind blew from the north, and Sansa's teeth chattered. He offered her his cloak without a word. They passed empty farms, dead animals, and burned homes. The war had touched everything. No place was safe. By the third night they found shelter in a barn. As they sat by a small fire in the corner, the Hound finally spoke. "You still think I'm a monster?" She looked at him, really looked, and shook her head. "No, you're broken like me." He blinked, surprised by the honesty. Then he laughed. Not the cruel laugh she remembered from the Red Keep. This one was quiet, almost real. "Maybe we're both monsters," he said. "But monsters survive." That night, Sansa didn't sleep far from him. She didn't fear him anymore. She didn't fear much at all. Because, for the first time since her father died, she wasn't alone. The fourth week on the road brought new dangers. Not fire and mobs, but cold and hunger. The woods they passed through grew thicker, the trees older, as though the land itself had forgotten what warmth was. The path twisted northward, the only direction that made sense to her, even if the Hound had doubts. They didn't talk much, not in full sentences. He wasn't built for conversation, and she was too tired for it. But something had shifted. Where once he was just a shield of violence, now he was a presence she leaned on, not just for survival, but for sanity. At night, she lay wrapped in his cloak, listening to his breathing. Sometimes he twitched in his sleep, jaw clenched, hands curling into fists. The war hadn't ended in his head. It never would. One morning, they stumbled across a group of travelers, 3 men and a woman armed and ragged. Bandits probably, wolves in the skin of survivors. The Hound stepped in front of Sansa the moment they were spotted. One of the men smiled, showing rotted teeth. "Now what's a little bird doing out in these woods with a dog like you?" The man sneered. Sansa's stomach dropped. That name, Little Bird, and it felt like chains. "She's with me," the Hound said, voice like gravel. "You got 5 seconds to walk away." The bandit chuckled. "Is that right? She your pet now? Pretty thing like that." He didn't finish the sentence. The Hound moved like a storm, steel flashing. One man was down before he could draw. The second backed up, hands raised. The third ran. The woman stayed where she was, eyes wide, blood spraying across her face from the one the Hound gutted. "You picked the wrong girl," he growled. Sansa didn't scream. She didn't flinch. Not this time. She watched as the remaining 2 ran for the trees, dragging the injured one behind them. The Hound wiped his blade clean again. "You keep looking like that, and they'll think you've gone cold," he muttered. "I have," she replied softly. "Maybe that's the only way to survive." They left the bodies behind and didn't speak of it again. That night, as they camped in a hollow beside a frozen stream, Sansa asked a question that had been eating at her for days. "What happens if I don't want to go back?" The Hound looked up from the rabbit he was skinning. "Back where?" "To any of it, Winterfell, the politics, the wars. I'm tired, Sandor." It was the first time she'd used his name. He didn't answer right away, just looked at her like she'd said something dangerous. "Then don't," he said finally. "Let the wolves and lions kill each other. Let the throne rot. You and I, we can disappear." "Disappear?" There are villages out west. Places no one remembers. Change your name. Learn to fish, drink, fight if someone gets in your way. Live. She chewed her lip. Could I? Better than dying for a family that sold you to the Lannisters. Sold you to the Lannisters. His words were blunt. Cruel even, but true. She looked at him, at the scarred side of his face, the one people flinched from. But she didn't, not anymore. And for the first time she wondered if he was right. What if she didn't belong in a castle? What if queenship and honor and duty were lies carved into her skin by men who only saw her as a pawn? What if freedom looked like dirt roads, cold fires, and a man with a sword who'd kill for her? Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. She didn't answer him that night, but she slept closer. It was near dusk when they reached a small village, nestled in the crook of a valley. No walls, no banners, just a scattering of wooden homes, smoke curling gently from their chimneys. The kind of place that didn't ask questions, the kind of place where names didn't matter. The Hound paused at the edge of the tree line, eyes scanning the settlement like a man who'd seen too many traps. They've got livestock, he muttered. Might trade for food, or steal it if they're pricks. Sansa tugged her borrowed cloak tighter. She hadn't seen herself in a mirror in weeks, but she imagined she didn't look much like a Stark anymore. Just another traveler with blistered feet and dirt-caked nails. I'll talk, she said. They're more likely to trust me. He gave her a look, half doubt, half amusement. You think that sweet face of yours still works after all this time? She didn't answer, just started walking. It turned out she was right. An old woman greeted them with wary eyes and a hand on a pitchfork, but when Sansa spoke, soft, calm, with just the right tremble, the woman's suspicion cracked. They were offered bread and broth and a barn to sleep in for the night. No names were exchanged. No questions were asked. Just survival in its purest form. Later, as they sat beside a pile of hay, Sansa watched as the Hound pulled a splinter from his palm with his teeth. You could stay here, he said quietly, not looking at her. These people wouldn't give a shit who you are. Might even take you in. Her stomach twisted. What about you? He shrugged. I don't belong anywhere. She knew that wasn't entirely true. He didn't belong in castles or courts, but in places like this, with soil under his nails and peace on his back. Maybe that's where monsters went when they were too tired to keep fighting. I'm not staying, she said. He looked up. Why? Because I don't know what I'm looking for yet. But it's not a barn in a nameless valley. He snorted. You sound like your sister. That caught her off guard. You knew Arya. He nodded slowly. She tried to stab me once. Twice, actually. Sansa laughed. A real laugh, cracked and worn but still alive. It echoed softly through the rafters. The sound must have drawn attention, because a few minutes later, the barn door creaked open. A silhouette stood against the fading light. A man, ragged cloak, lean face, familiar eyes. Sansa froze. Podrick? She whispered. The young man blinked, shocked. Lady Sansa? The Hound stood immediately, hand on his blade. Podrick took a step inside, hands raised. I was sent by Brienne. She's alive. She's been searching for you ever since King's Landing fell into madness. Sansa's heart pounded. Where is she? She asked, voice trembling. Not far, he said. At a nearby village. She heard rumors of a red-haired girl with a large man who spoke little and killed often. Sounded like you. The Hound growled. So what? She wants to take her back. To the bloody Starks, or the bloody throne. She wants to protect her, Podrick said quickly. Swore an oath to Lady Catelyn. She never broke it. Sansa sat in silence. The world she'd tried to leave behind had just found her again. Tell her I'll come, she said finally, but on my terms. Podrick nodded and left without another word. The barn was quiet again. Only the soft breath of horses and the wind through the cracks. You sure about this? The Hound asked. No, she admitted. But I have to see her. He gave a grunt of disapproval and stood. Well, if this turns into a trap, I'll kill her first. Sansa smiled. It was the darkest, warmest promise she'd ever been given. And maybe that was enough. Brienne was waiting at the edge of the forest when they arrived. She stood tall, armored as always, but there was wear on her, new scars, heavier eyes, a blade that looked like it hadn't been sheathed in weeks. When she saw Sansa, the relief in her face was almost painful. "Lady Sansa," she breathed, stepping forward. But Sansa held up a hand. "Don't call me that." "Not here." Brienne froze, eyes darting briefly to the Hound, who stood behind her like a shadow, arms crossed and unimpressed. "I made a vow to your mother," Brienne began. "And you kept it," Sansa interrupted. "You found me. That's enough." Brienne looked like she wanted to argue. She didn't. Instead, she gave a small nod. "I'm just glad you're alive." Sansa's lips twitched. "I wasn't for a while." They sat by a fire in Brienne's temporary camp, just her, Podrick, and a donkey with more fleas than fur. Brienne offered to share dried meat and mead. The Hound took both without a word. "So what now?" he muttered. "You drag her back to whatever pile of rubble the Starks are clinging to?" Brienne met his gaze, not flinching. "I take her wherever she wants to go." That surprised him. He glanced at Sansa. "And you believe that?" "I do," Sansa said. But her voice was distant. Her mind had already wandered, because Brienne wasn't the only one who had found her. That night, after everyone had gone quiet, Sansa heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. She sat up just as a figure moved through the trees. Not Podrick. Not Brienne. A man in dark armor, gold lion etched on the hilt of his blade. For a breath her heart stopped. It wasn't Jaime, it was Sir Meryn Trant, alive and smiling. "You've grown, little bird," he said, voice like rot. "Thought you could run from the lions forever." The scream caught in her throat, but it never made it out, because a blur of shadow crashed into him from the side, a growl, a flash of steel, the Hound. He didn't hesitate, didn't speak, just drove Trant to the ground with the force of 10 men and buried his dagger in the man's throat. Over and over. When it was done, Trant's face was barely recognizable. Blood pooled into the roots around the tree. The Hound stood, breathing hard, shaking. His hands were red. His eyes were wild. "He was dead," Sansa whispered. "He was supposed to be dead." "He is now," Sandor muttered. Brienne arrived moments later, sword drawn, but it was already over. She stared at the body, then at Sandor. "You know who he was?" she asked. "I know enough," he grunted. "And I know what he did to girls." Silence fell over them all. Later, when Sansa washed her hands in the river, the Hound stood nearby, arms crossed. "I told you the past doesn't let go easy," he said. "It hunts you." Sansa didn't reply. Her fingers trembled in the water. "I didn't run," she said quietly. "No, you didn't." He looked at her then, not as the girl he had once dragged through fire and filth, but as something else entirely. "You want to keep running?" he asked. She turned to him. "No," she said. "Now I want to start fighting." The next morning, Sansa stood barefoot in the dewy grass, watching the rising sun burn the mist off the hills. Her cloak hung off one shoulder, wind catching her red hair and tugging it free from its braid. She looked like a ghost pulled from another life, one that had finally decided to haunt back. Brienne stepped beside her, silent for a moment. "I know that look," Brienne said. "It's the same one your mother wore the day she marched to war." Sansa didn't answer right away. "I've been a prisoner, a pawn, a promise," she said. "Everyone who claimed to protect me ended up using me." Brienne's jaw clenched. "That's not who I am." "I know, that's why I'm telling you this now." Sansa turned, her voice calm but sharp. "If I go back north, it won't be as a girl. It won't be to cry at the gates of Winterfell and beg for the past." "You want to take it back," Brienne said quietly. "No," Sansa said. "I want to rebuild it, on my own terms." From behind, the Hound snorted. He'd been listening. "You're dreaming, girl." "I've earned the right to dream," she said, spinning to face him. "And this time I'll fight to keep it." He looked at her for a long time, then nodded once. Not approval, just understanding. Later, around the fire, they laid out a plan. Brienne told them Winterfell had been taken by the Boltons, that Roose was dead, and his bastard, Ramsay, ruled now. Sansa's stomach knotted at the name. She remembered his eyes, his smile, and she knew that Winterfell wasn't just taken. It had been defiled. "I want it back," she said. "You and what army?" the Hound asked. Sansa looked at him, cool and unflinching. "The army I'll build." Over the next week, they travelled from village to village, not as runaways, but as something more. Word spread quietly. that the daughter of Ned Stark lived, that she'd escaped the lions and the south and walked through fire. People listened. Northern folk were loyal, especially to ghosts, and Sansa Stark had become one. In a small town near the Wolfswood, they met survivors of the Karstark bannermen, broken men, starving, scattered. But when Sansa stood before them, dirty, thin, eyes blazing with something hard, they bowed their heads. "We thought the wolves were dead," one of them said. "They are," she replied, "and that's why we need new ones," one of them said. "They are," she replied, "and that's why we need new ones." The Hound watched all of it with his usual grim disdain, but she caught him once, just once, watching her with something close to pride. He never said it out loud. He didn't have to. He'd seen kings kneel and cowards rise, but what he saw now was different. This wasn't the same little bird from the Red Keep. This was a wolf learning how to bare her teeth. And as they stood beneath the looming trees of the north, with a half-dozen houses starting to whisper her name again, he leaned down to her and said, "You want a throne, little bird?" "No," she said. "I want justice," he smiled. "Just a crack. Same thing if you're doing it right." But it wasn't all hope and fire, because news came too. From the east, from the Vale, Littlefinger was moving. They found the Raven waiting in a village tavern, tied to a post by a merchant who had no idea what message the bird had carried. Just that it had flown down from the mountains, cloaked in the blue of House Arryn. Brienne opened the scroll and read aloud, her voice tight. "To Lady Sansa Stark, word has reached the Vale of your survival. I wept with joy. The Knights of the Vale stand ready. Come to me, let me help you reclaim your home. I've always believed in you. Lord Petter Baelish." The firelight flickered across Sansa's face, but she didn't blink. She read the words again in her mind, as if each line were a blade slipping quietly beneath her ribs. "Always believed in me," she said. "He believed in owning me." The Hound grunted, throwing a bone into the fire. "We should kill him." "Tempting," Sansa muttered, but Brienne looked worried. "He commands the Knights of the Vale. If he rides north with them, you could retake Winterfell in days. You'd only need to say yes." "That's the trap," Sansa said. And it was a trap made of sugar and velvet. Baelish was poison disguised as salvation, always had been. He was the man who betrayed her father, who sold her to the Boltons, who whispered love and loyalty while handing her over to monsters. Now he came with knights and flowers. "Do you want to meet him?" Brienne asked carefully. Sansa looked into the fire. "Yes," she said. "I want to see his face when he realizes I'm not the little girl who used to smile at his lies." They set out for the Eyrie. It took 2 weeks of hard riding, through windswept hills and frozen mountain passes. The Hound hated every minute of it, muttering about goat tracks and noble fools. But he never left her side. At the gates of the Eyrie, they were greeted not by guards, but by a boy. Robin Arryn, now taller, a little leaner, still with that vacant look in his eyes. He barely said a word, just smiled at Sansa like she was some fable come to life. "She's prettier than I remember," he whispered to no one in particular. Peter Baelish waited in the great hall, flanked by banners and smiles. He wore black as always, his beard sharp and trimmed, his eyes bright with false warmth. "Sansa," he said, stepping forward like a lover from a forgotten poem. "You've grown into something magnificent." Brienne's hand twitched near her sword. The Hound's jaw tightened. But Sansa just smiled. "Lord Baelish," she said coolly, "you still wear the same mask." He faltered, just for a second, then recovered. "You've suffered. I never wanted that." "But you allowed it," she said. "You handed me over to Ramsay Bolton. You knew what he was." Peter opened his hands like a priest giving confession. "I made a mistake, one I've long regretted. Let me make it right. Let me give you what's yours, Winterfell. And in return?" His smile curved. "Your trust, your alliance, your presence by my side as we reshape the North." There it was. The price! Sansa stepped closer, voice quiet and razor-sharp. "You want a crown, Petter? You'll never get it. Not through me." But still she didn't refuse his army, not yet. Later, as they prepared to leave, the Hound pulled her aside. "You play a dangerous game." "I know. He'll betray you again, probably." The Hound leaned in, his voice low. Then let me kill him now and be done with it. Sansa looked into the darkness where Peter walked, speaking sweetly to Robin, plotting gods know what. No, she whispered. I want him to see me win first. Then we end him. For the first time, the Hound didn't argue, and as they rode from the Eyrie, 100 knights behind them, Sansa Stark knew something had changed. She wasn't returning home. She was taking it. Snow fell in thick, silent drifts as the banners of the Vale rode with Sansa Stark across the north. The air was sharp, every breath a bite of ice, but she didn't flinch. She wore furs now, not gowns, and a look in her eyes that made even seasoned knights avoid her gaze. The Hound rode beside her, grim and quiet, a shadow at her side. Brienne followed close behind, ever watchful, and behind them 100 Vale soldiers marched, their swords hungry for war and their loyalty bought, not with love, but with strategy. Winterfell loomed on the horizon, black stone and snow-slicked towers against a grey sky. It had never looked more like a tomb. Inside its walls, Ramsay Bolton ruled. Petyr Baelish rode ahead, his smug smile ever present as he negotiated terms with the guards at the gate, declaring loudly that he brought the rightful Lady of Winterfell to reclaim her home. Sansa let him do the talking, for now, but her fingers gripped the reins tighter with each step closer. She had not seen the inside of Winterfell since it was still warm with the memory of her brother's laughter, since her father's voice echoed in the halls, since the walls didn't reek of blood. Now it was something else. Now it was his. They were brought before Ramsay in the great hall. He wore black as always, his eyes glinting with that cruel spark that had once made her tremble. But not anymore. Lady Sansa, he said, smiling like a wolf with blood on his teeth. Back so soon? She stared at him. No bow, no smile, no words. The silence hung heavy. Baelish stepped forward. Lord Bolton. Silence, Sansa said, her voice calm but lethal. You don't speak for me. Ramsay's smile faltered. I've come to take back my home, she said, and with what army? Ramsay mocked, spreading his arms. You think the Vale fights for you? Petyr fights for himself. He always has. He was right. But that didn't matter, because the Vale soldiers weren't the only ones answering her call. Behind her the doors creaked open, and in walked the wildlings. Tormund Giantsbane led them, fiery beard, wild eyes, dragging a bloodied banner of House Bolton behind him. Jon Snow followed, ghost-like, eyes darker than the night outside. Sansa didn't smile, didn't need to. Ramsay paled. You're dead, he whispered. Jon stepped forward. Not yet. What followed was swift and brutal. A skirmish inside the halls, blades clashing, blood on the stones. Screams echoing through Winterfell as men who once pledged loyalty to Ramsay dropped their swords when they saw the Stark sigil rise again. The Hound was a fury of steel, cutting down any man who tried to touch Sansa. Brienne ran Ramsay's steward through with a single, righteous thrust, and when it was over, when the bodies were still and Winterfell was quiet again, Ramsay was dragged to the courtyard, beaten and bound. Sansa stood over him. This is my home, she said. And you defiled it. He grinned, bloodied teeth flashing. Do it then. Be like me. But she didn't. She stepped aside and let the Hound finish it. When it was done, she turned to Baelish, who still stood in the shadows, calculating. You got what you wanted, he said. Winterfell is yours, thanks to me. She approached him slowly. No, she said. Winterfell is mine despite you. He tried to speak, but she drew a dagger from her belt, not hidden, not rushed. She placed it gently against his chest. You taught me to play your game, she whispered. Now I'm winning it. And when she plunged the blade in, it was quiet. Clean, Baelish gasped, stared at her in disbelief, even as the light left his eyes. The hall watched in silence. Later they burned his body. That night, Sansa stood atop the battlements of Winterfell, snow falling around her like ash. Below, the banners of the wolf flapped in the wind. The north was hers again, not given, not gifted, but taken. The Hound stood beside her. You're not a bird anymore, he said. No, she replied. I'm the storm, he said. No, she replied. I'm the storm.